and thank you for being here. I just want, before we start, to acknowledge that we're all gathered today on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and and all the other Métis and First Nations and Inuit people who call this part of Canada home. In January, Canada announced a temporary pause on future funding to UNRWA. This difficult but necessary decision was taken alongside many donor countries following disturbing allegations that some of UNRWA employees participated in the horrific October 7th terrorist attacks against Israel. Today, I'm announcing that Canada's funding for UNRWA will resume. Aujourd'hui, j'annonce la reprise du financement pour les réfugiés de Palestine dans le Proche-Orient. The decision is in recognition of the serious and significant processes that the United Nations has undertaken to address the issues in UNRWA, and the recognition of the critical role that UNRWA plays in providing much-needed support to over 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, as well as the broader region, millions more in the broader region. Cette décision est prise en reconnaissance des processus sérieux et significatifs qui sont en cours pour adresser les problèmes de l'UNRWA, de la réalité du rôle essentiel que joue UNRWA et fournissant à plus de 2 millions de Palestiniens une aide vitale et plus des opérations cruciales qu'ils mènent ailleurs dans la région. Let me emphasize our position. There must be zero tolerance for terror-related activities within the United Nations, including in UNRWA. Canada has reviewed the interim report of the investigation conducted by the United Nations, and we're closely following this investigation as well as the conclusion of the broader independent review being conducted by former French Foreign Minister Colonna. I was in Rafah just 2 weeks ago, Rafah, Egypt, where I met courageous Canadian humanitarian workers who are doing everything that they can to save lives in Gaza. I saw hundreds of trucks filled with life-saving supplies stuck at the border, waiting to enter. And some of these trucks had been stationed at the border for over 2 weeks. Today, I'm also announcing that Canada is partnering with Jordan and the World Food Programme to conduct airdrops in Gaza to deliver essential food, clothing, and blankets to those who desperately need it. Aujourd'hui, j'annonce que le Canada fait équipe avec la Jordanie et le Programme alimentaire mondial pour effectuer des largages aériens à Gaza afin de livrer des articles essentiels dont les civils palestiniens ont désespérément besoin. Canada is offering financial support to the Jordan Hashemite Charity Organization, enabling the procurement of food, blankets, and winter clothing. I was in Jordan yesterday, and I saw these essential goods being loaded into planes destined for Gaza. We've also in the past allocated substantial funding to the World Food Programme, and through them, we will be supporting the airdrops of Canadian-funded supplies into Gaza. In addition to that, today I'm also announcing that the Canadian Armed Forces will be providing over 300 cargo parachutes from the Canadian Army Advanced Warfare Center in Trenton to the Royal Jordanian Air Force to assist them in conducting airdrops in Gaza. These 300 parachutes from Canada will enable the delivery and the airdropping of 75 tons of food, medicine, clothing, and hygiene products into much-needed Gazans, into the hands of much-needed Palestinian civilians. Canada continues to call for compliance with international humanitarian law with respect to the allowing of unimpeded and significant aid to go into Gaza. We continue to call for the immediate release of all hostages. We condemn Hamas for its actions, terrorist actions on October the 7th. We call for an immediate ceasefire, and we call for much more assistance to reach Palestinians in Gaza through many different means. Lives are at stake, and this support simply cannot wait. Canada is using every tool possible to get more aid into Gaza to those who desperately need it. We will simply not stand by, and we will not let up in our efforts. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Hi, Adrian Gobriel, CTV National News. Minister, what specifically did your government see in the UN's interim report that made you comfortable enough to resume funding for UNRWA?
Well, from the very beginning of our humanitarian response to the crisis in Gaza, we've been informed by a focus on the lives and the condition of civilians, both Palestinians and Israelis. We've been reassured by the contents of this interim report. But in addition to that, we've been reassured by the number of processes and steps that UNRWA itself has undertaken, as well as reforms introduced through the leadership of the UN Secretary General. And also, we are resuming funding to UNRWA because of the dire humanitarian situation on the ground. UNRWA forms the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza and in the region. Of course, there's many other international trusted partners that we work with, but they also have to work at times with UNRWA because of its networks, because of its presence and its history on the ground. So we are resuming our relationship and funding and unpausing our funding to UNRWA because of the recognition of the contents of the report, the steps that have been undertaken by UNRWA, some completed, some in process, the steps that have been taken by the UN, and a recognition of the dire need on the ground and the role that UNRWA plays in meeting the needs of those desperate civilians on the ground.
From that interim report, do you see any evidence that members of UNRWA took part in the October 7th terrorist attack?
I will urge you to contact the UN itself to provide the report to you. What I can say is that we've reviewed the interim report into the investigation into UNRWA and we're reassured by the contents of that report. But in addition to that, the decision we're making today, the announcement we're making today is informed by the dire humanitarian situation on the ground and the need to do everything that we can to save lives. And that is why I'm also announcing our partnership with Jordan to drop food, medicine, and clothing into Gaza, our partnership with using the World Food Program, but also providing much-needed cargo parachutes from the Canadian Armed Forces that will enable the airdropping of 75 tons of much-needed food, clothing, and medicines into Gaza.
Question. On Saturday, protesters approached you, some might say accosted you, at an event where the PM had to cancel his appearance. Today, the media were given 1 hour notice for this press conference. Is your government concerned in trying to evade protesters at announcements like this one here today?
From the very beginning, we've been informed by a focus on the need to protect civilians. That has been our main guiding principle in our response to the crisis in Gaza. And today's announcement is informed by the same preoccupation with protection of civilian lives. And I understand that there's a lot of passion and frustrations on either side of this issue. People have the right to absolutely protest and express themselves in a democratic society. But at the same time, since October 7th, we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism, a rise in Islamophobia. And we've condemned that, and our government takes those trends very, very seriously. And while we welcome and recognize the right of Canadians to protest and express themselves freely, we also, of course, condemn hatred and intolerance, as well as intimidation and violence.
Good Afternoon, Victoria Stunt with CBC National News. Minister, Canada has repeatedly acted in lockstep with international allies throughout this. Why are you moving ahead with restoring UNRWA funding when Australia and New Zealand are not?
Well, first of all, New Zealand did not pause funding to UNRWA, so that I just want to inform you of that. But we have been acting in lockstep with our partners and like-minded countries from the very beginning of our response to these allegations. While the UN has been responding by putting in place processes to address the concerns of Canada and all the donor nations, we've been actively working with them through our ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray, as well as all of us, all my counterparts. We've been engaged very actively on the work that the UN needs to do to address some of the concerns, the recent concerns, as well as the long-term concerns that we've had in terms of its practices and its ability to become more transparent and accountable and increase its credibility. So we've been engaged in that work from the very beginning, and we'll continue to do that while the investigation will be completed, as well as the independent review. Having said that, we also have to take into account, and I think Canadians see the dire situation on the ground in Gaza and the need for us to do even more. We've done a lot. We were the first G7 country to respond to the humanitarian need by providing significant support in the form of $60 million in the beginning, and then following that up with an additional $40 million. And today we're the first G7 country to resume funding to UNRWA in recognition of that, of the need to respond and the need to recognize that UNRWA is the backbone of the humanitarian response to the needs of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, while acknowledging the steps that have been taken both by UNRWA and by the larger UN to address some of the concerns that we've had.
To follow up, is Canada willing to collaborate in the delivery of humanitarian aid by sea that the U.S. is planning with their temporary port project?
So, as I said, we welcome every tool that we and our like-minded partners are trying to use to get more aid into Gaza. And we welcome the exploration of a maritime corridor into Gaza, and we will engage with the United States and the EU and others who are exploring this issue, and we will do everything that we can to contribute to those efforts to the best that we can. But I just want to bring it back to the condition of people on the ground. I was briefed 2 weeks ago in Rafah by the head of the World Food Program in Gaza. He came over to actually tell me the condition on the ground, and he said, if we don't act even more significantly to get more aid into Gaza, we're looking at the mass starvation of children, women and men in northern Gaza particularly, for example, where we haven't had convoys reach northern Gaza in a while. And that's why airdrops, although they're not absolutely a substitute to trucks and other forms of getting aid in, they're a very important tool to address the needs of people who are in parts of Gaza that haven't had any significant aid or any aid at all reach them for weeks. So I saw yesterday, for example, Canadian aid being loaded onto a plane in Jordan, a plane that is taking 28 tons of much needed food and clothing and other supplies into Gaza. Those airdrops are very, very important. They're one of the main tools that we're using to address the needs of Palestinian civilians on the ground in Gaza.
Just one follow-up. You mentioned your trips into Rafah. Is today's announcement, directly related to what you witnessed when you were in Egypt at the Rafah crossing? And did you come back to your government and say, we need to get back in?
Well, I've always, we've made it a point as a government to really continue to be focused on the needs of civilians on the ground, to protect them, to call for a ceasefire, to call for more humanitarian access and more corridors. But absolutely, my numerous visits to the region, including to Rafah, Egypt, as well as just yesterday in Jordan, seeing the efforts of like-minded countries to use every tool possible. The Germans, the Dutch, and others are using airdrops, and we're doing the same because they're needed on the ground. And the work that I have seen Canadian organizations on the ground do to move aid from Egypt into Gaza and from Jordan into Gaza is really admirable. And the reports that they've given me back in the region and beyond are really, really heartbreaking. We need to do more to get more aid in, and that is why we've been advocating from the very beginning to have more significantly higher volumes of aid going in, but also unimpeded corridors of humanitarian aid to go in, and free access, uninterrupted access for humanitarian workers as well as health workers in Gaza. We're looking at a serious risk of mass starvation in parts of Gaza, particularly in the north, and that's what I heard directly from members of the World Food Programme, the Palestinian Red Crescent, the Egyptian Red Crescent, the Jordanian Red Crescent, UNICEF, World Health Organization, and others who are saying we simply need to do more. And critical to the free movement and easier movement of humanitarian workers on the ground is a ceasefire, and key to that is the release of all hostages by Hamas.
Well, just one more. Would you say that because of the dire situation on the ground, really Canada's hand has been forced here to work with UNRWA, even though this report has not been completed, that we need to work with them because simply there's no other option?
Well, we are reinstating funding to UNRWA in recognition of course, the dire situation on the ground, which I just described, but also to recognize the significant steps that UNRWA and the larger UN family have undertaken in responding to our concerns as a donor nation. And those steps have been taken in partnership with us. We've been actively engaged in making sure that UNRWA understands our concerns, that UNRWA takes the necessary steps that it needs to take to reassure us, that the larger UN body gives unrestricted collaboration to the independent review that's being conducted by Ms. Colonna, and that they take other additional steps, which they have. I mean those significant steps that have been taken by UNRWA and by the UN and the other steps that are in process are significant and comprehensive and transparent, and we've been reassured by those steps, while obviously we will continue to be engaged with the UN and our partner countries to make sure that the transparent, independent investigation is completed and that we have a final report, and that the independent review is also completed, and we will of course continue to work with the UN to make sure that the recommendations that come out of the independent review are implemented fully, because we understand, and we've communicated this to the UN, that the credibility of UNRWA in our eyes is crucial to its ability to continue to provide, to get support from us, and is crucial to its ability to continue to deliver much needed services and the lifeline that it is to Palestinian civilians. Thank you.